Hey everyone, I hope you are all well. This is going to be a little bit of a different video for us. Usually in our global philosophy course, I do a live stream and you are interacting with me in the comments, but I've had some difficulty getting all of the technology to work, namely getting the Wi-Fi to actually run the video. And so I thought I would take a break from that for this week, finish up our work on Sylvia Wynter, and try and get everything ready to go for next week. So hopefully for next week there will be a live stream, and we'll have a bit more time together to interact. But for the time being, we're going to focus on Sylvia Wynter, and particularly focusing on Wynter's idea of the human. And I'm just going to talk to you. Sorry about that, bumping the mic. I'm just going to talk to you about that. Here in my studio space in my apartment in St. Louis, Missouri. You can see it's truly a place where a lot of work happens. Green screens in the back. Amplifiers over off to the side. This is a Mag Guitar original. I find it humorous and humbling to have a picture of myself hanging up in my wall on my wall in my studio, because I think it's just dumb in the best possible way. Not the picture. The picture's great. Maggie's artwork is great. Go check it out if you can. Yeah, and then obligatory Puerto Rican flag because global philosophy focused on the Caribbean. And Yo soy Boricua, so, that's how it goes. Anyway, let's jump into it and let's talk about Sylvia Wynter. So, as I mentioned last week in the live stream, Sylvia Wynter is a Jamaican philosopher, poet, scholar, etc. She is a person who thinks beyond disciplinary boundaries and really challenges not just the idea of disciplinarity, but certain conceptions we might have of interdisciplinarity, right? She's not talking about using particular disciplines in conjunction with each other. She's exploding the barriers between those disciplines by examining things from a different standpoint than those disciplines and the standpoint that those disciplines presuppose, which makes her a very interesting read, because you get this rhythm to what she's saying that incorporates all of these different references and all of these different historical moments, and she's very, very thorough there. But it doesn't read like a history book that you're used to, and it doesn't read like a philosophy text that you're used to or literary criticism that you're used to. And this is all intentional, for at least from what I understand. It's all intentional because Wynter is trying to undermine and unsettle the disciplinary expectations that we have. So if we approach her work with an expectation that she's going to read like every other philosopher that we've encountered and read, we're going to be sort of thrown back on ourselves. We're going to be unsettled. She wants us to encounter her work with seriousness and with charity, but at the same time, to not expect that it's going to be like everything else, which I think is very refreshing, and it's challenging in a good way that makes me have to stretch my my scholarly muscles, because I get used to particular ways of reading things and flying through them quicker because I understand how arguments work and things like that. But Wynter's a little bit different. So I basically want to really quickly, and unfortunately far too quickly, go through a couple of ideas related to her understanding of the human or humanity in order to unpack that concept and or the concepts that surround it. Because in all of that, what we have is, in Wynter's thought of the human, is a set of conceptual tools, a new way of thinking about humanity that helps us challenge Eurocentric ways of thinking, being, doing, and conceiving of our life together in the world. So, to begin with, we need to talk about Man 1 and Man 2. These are terms that Wynter uses to talk about the way that European Eurocentric, which would also, I would argue, include the North American, particularly the United States and Canada, those traditions of epistemological thinking, right? Epistemology being the philosophy of knowledge, how we conceive of what it means to know and how we know. Wynter claims that there are two conceptions of man, this European subject, that emerge in the Renaissance and after, that really shape the way that humans are conceived of in the world. So the first one, Man 1, exists pretty much from the Renaissance until around the 18th century. And this is man as a religious subject. So if you think back to when we talked about Ramon Grossfogwell's work, we talked about how before race was understood biologically, it was understood theologically. That is, race was connected to this idea of who has a soul, who has a partial soul or an animal soul, who doesn't have a soul. And that lays on top of this idea of who is human and who is not human or subhuman, right? These varying degrees of having a soul, not having a soul, having a particular religious tradition or heritage and not having that. This is Man 1. Man 1 is Homo religiosus, who man is the political animal in the sense that human beings are conceived of as creatures who have reason and whose reason is connected to their understanding of God. And if they can reasonably worship God, they are beings that have a soul. This is Man 1. Man 2 is the transformation or mutation of this from the 18th century to the present, where these conceptions of who is human, who is not human are biologized. And so we have Man 1, this spiritual and political understanding of what it means to be a human being, to have a soul, transforms into a biological form and an economic form, where one's worth is based off of one's productivity relative to producing for something that will generate capital and income and that sort of a thing. Okay? So, moving beyond that a little bit, I want to look at what, sorry, my phone's blowing up. People are, I don't know, hitting me up for the best Animal Crossing strategies. Anyway, I want to read something from this book right here, which is Sylvia Wynter on being human as praxis. Being human as praxis. It is a quote from Walter Manolo, who explains what he sees Wynter doing. And so I'm going to read this, unpack it a little bit, and then jump into some of the key parts of how Sylvia Wynter's thought transforms and challenges our notions of the human. So Manolo says, quote, "She powerfully explores the roots of Western and colonial knowledge systems and uncovers the otherwise veiled link between racial, gendered, and sexual belonging, differential ways of knowing and imagining the world, and the overarching governing codes that have created, maintained, and normalized practices of exclusion. She is not looking to change or supersede epistemic categories and established knowledge. Rather, she seeks to undo the systems through which knowledge and knowing are constituted. At the same time, Wynter is not proposing to contribute to and comfortably participate in a system of knowledge that left her out of humanity as a Black Caribbean woman, but rather delink herself from the very system of knowledge in order to engage in epistemic obedience. Epistemic disobedience. So that's Walter Manolo, again, from Sylvia Wynter on Being Human as Praxis. Now, key here is that Wynter seeks to undo systems that produce the type of knowledge that gives us a conception of the human that excludes others. Now, this seems really obvious to us, right? Certain groups of people in the past have been thought of as less than human or subhuman or non-human, and now we're smarter than those old people who used to think that, and so we think that everybody's a human. Well, not so fast, because what we're dealing with is the back end of what of how our societies and our world functions. So these conceptions of the human might not be stated outrightly, but they are operative. All right? Because as Manolo points out when he's writing in this chapter talking about Wynter, he says, if we accept that epistemology gives us the principles and rules of knowing through which the human and humanity are understood, we are trapped in a system that fails to notice its origin, and that its origin stories are created out of stories themselves. They are narratives. They are these stories that human beings map onto the cosmos or map onto their area of influence. And as that area of influence expands outward through colonization, now those stories about what it means to be a human being, what it means to be a non-human being, are expanded out with that. So Wynter notices this connection between geography and humanity pretty strongly and emphasizes it in a way that that is not unlike, but not the same as Manolo. All right. So we tend to believe that our cosmogonies, that our stories are descriptive statements about how the universe works and how we came to be and who we are as humans. We tend to believe that these are natural truths, but these are not natural truths. These are stories that we tell ourselves. And the problem is that the systems that we use are calcified by our commitment to maintain them, even if they are underserving us. So we have these definitions and these understandings, what Heidegger would call pre-understanding, right? We're not cognitively, not cognitively, we're not consciously and deliberately thinking about this, but in the background, what's going on in the background of our thought is something that is not dissimilar to what Wynter is talking about here and what Manolo is talking about here. We are committed to systems and structures and ways of understanding what it means to be a human being, how the world came to be, that even if they underserve us, are still the system that we're used to. And so we reinforce that because the system itself is self-reinforcing. What do I mean by that? As we continue to maintain the system of understanding things epistemologically in accordance with Eurocentric ideas, like I was talking about, even if we hold it to be inadequate or a placeholder, it is still nonetheless far too familiar for us to let go of right away. And thus we reinforce it. And in doing so, it takes our belief and perpetuates it forward. Stay tuned for part 2.